Guys, Claire's is now shutting down, and it used to be my favourite shop as a kid, so let's go see what we can get for £10.
Go, Kylie, go. Good job, Kylie. You're doing amazing, sweetie. Wow, look at her go.
Claire's just filed for bankruptcy, again, the second time in 7 years. But here's what makes this absolutely insane. Back in 2006, Claire's was unstoppable. Record sales, record profits, and zero debt. Not a single dollar owed to anyone. Fast forward to today, and they're being sold off for pocket change after burning through billions. So what the hell happened? How does a company go from owning 99% of American malls to begging 150 different buyers to save them? The answer is darker than you think, and it starts with one catastrophic decision that destroyed everything. Let's go back to the beginning because Claire's wasn't always struggling. The whole empire was built by a guy named Roland Schaefer, and his origin story is actually wild. In the 1960s, Schaefer wasn't selling jewelry at all. He was making serious money in the fashion wig business. Yeah, wigs were huge back then. But when that trend crashed in the 1970s, he had to pivot fast. So he bought this small costume jewelry chain based in Chicago called Claire's Boutiques and decided to make that his focus. And it worked. Over the next 30 years, he turned that small chain into a billion-dollar international phenomenon by doing something simple: reinvesting profits and expanding aggressively. He bought out competing jewelry chains, established Claire's in almost every U.S. state, and made the brand synonymous with affordable accessories for young girls. By the time we hit the 2000s, Claire's was everywhere. We're talking 2,700 stores across North America and Europe, plus almost 200 Icing stores targeting a slightly older demographic. If you walked into any American mall, you saw Claire's. The pink and purple explosion of jewelry, hair accessories, and stuffed animals was impossible to miss. But Roland Schaefer was getting old. In 2002, at 86 years old, he had a stroke. It wasn't too serious, but it was enough for him to realize he needed to step back. So he handed control to his two daughters, Bonnie and Mara Schaefer, who had already been working at the company for years. And honestly, they did great. Under their leadership, Claire's hit its absolute peak. 2006 was probably the best year the company ever had. They reported record sales, record profits, and here's the most important part: zero debt. The company didn't owe a single penny to anyone. They were printing money and had complete financial freedom to do whatever they wanted. It was the perfect position to be in. But then everything changed. In 2007, Bonnie and Mara made a decision that would haunt Claire's forever. They decided to sell the company. A private equity firm called Apollo Management came in with an offer of $3.1 billion, and the sisters took it. They put out this joint statement talking about how much soul-searching went into the decision and how it was a successful conclusion to their strategic review. On paper, it looked like a huge win. They got over $3 billion for the company their father built. But there was a massive problem with this deal that wouldn't become obvious until later. Apollo Management didn't pay for Claire's with their own money. They used a leveraged buyout. That means they borrowed most of the money to buy the company and then put that debt onto Claire's itself. Overnight, Claire's went from having zero debt to owing $2.3 billion. Let that sink in. A company that was completely debt-free suddenly had over $2 billion in loans on its books, and that debt came with interest payments that would cripple them for years. Over the next decade, Claire's paid almost $2 billion just in interest expenses, not paying down the actual debt, just interest. $2 billion that could have been used to modernize their stores, build a better online platform, invest in marketing, or compete with emerging brands. Instead, all that money went straight to banks. And during the same period, the company cycled through 6 different CEOs. None of them had any personal connection to the brand. None of them had the vision or resources to fix what was fundamentally broken. The debt was like a parasite draining the company dry, and no amount of leadership changes could solve it. This is the part where people always ask, why would the daughters sell if they knew this would happen? And the truth is, they probably didn't fully understand the consequences. Private equity firms are really good at making these deals look beneficial for everyone. The sisters got their money and walked away. Apollo got control of a profitable brand. But Claire's itself got destroyed in the process. And then the timing made everything exponentially worse. Remember, they took on that $2.3 billion in debt in 2007. Guess what happened in 2008? The recession hit. One of the worst economic collapses in modern history happened almost immediately after Claire's got buried in debt. Mall traffic completely collapsed. People weren't buying jewelry and accessories when they were worried about losing their jobs or their houses. For the first time in over 15 years, Claire's sales dropped. and they were already drowning in debt they couldn't afford. It was the worst possible timing. Then, just when things started stabilizing, more disasters hit. The pandemic in 2020 obliterated malls even further. Stores were shut down for months. Even after they reopened, people weren't going to malls like they used to. Then inflation hit hard, forcing Claire's to raise prices, which drove even more customers away. And then tariffs became a massive issue. About 56% of Claire's merchandise is imported from China, with another 14% coming from other countries. When tariffs went into effect, they estimated it would cost them an extra $30 million. Every single economic disaster of the past 15 years hit Claire's at the absolute worst time, and they had no financial cushion to survive it because all their money was going to debt payments. But there's another massive problem that made everything harder. Claire's is a mall brand, not just any mall brand. They might be the most mall-dependent brand that's ever existed. They've been a staple in shopping malls for 50 years. During the 1980s and 1990s, when malls were booming, Claire's grew right alongside them. By 2018, they claimed to operate in 99% of American malls. Think about that. If you've been to a mall anywhere in the country, there was almost definitely a Claire's there. I genuinely can't remember ever being in a mall without seeing one. But here's the problem. Malls are dying. We all know this. Foot traffic has been declining for years. Entire malls are shutting down, and Claire's is trapped. They tried to adapt. They formed partnerships with other retailers to sell Claire's products outside of malls, creating stores within stores at places like Macy's, Kohl's, and especially Walmart. But most of those partnerships failed. They struggled with inventory management and couldn't turn a profit, so the deals got scaled back. They also tried building up their online presence to compensate for declining store traffic. But that didn't work either, and the reason is actually really interesting. In recent court filings, their CEO Chris Kramer explained why e-commerce has been so difficult for Claire's. He said the majority of their customers are young kids who don't have access to money, credit cards, or the ability to shop online themselves. These kids rely on their parents or guardians to physically bring them to Claire's stores so they can see and touch the products before buying them. The whole experience of walking into a Claire's, looking at all the colorful jewelry and accessories, trying things on, and picking out exactly what you want is a huge part of the appeal. You can't replicate that online, so Claire's is stuck in this impossible situation where they need malls to survive, but malls are disappearing, and they can't transition to online sales because their business model doesn't translate well to e-commerce. They're trapped in a dying ecosystem with no clear way out. And while all this was happening, new competitors were moving in and stealing their customers. Online, brands like Shein and Temu exploded in popularity, selling cheap jewelry and accessories directly to consumers. These companies operate on razor-thin margins and can undercut Claire's on price while offering way more variety. In physical retail, a brand called Lovisa emerged as a serious threat. They sell similar products, but with a cooler, trendier aesthetic that appeals to younger customers. Lovisa positioned themselves as the modern alternative to Claire's, and it worked. But the biggest competitor might actually be Five Below. Their first store opened in 2002, and they've since grown to become larger than Claire's in the United States. They sell low-priced accessories, toys, and random stuff aimed at a younger demographic. And here's the kicker. As of the past few years, Five Below also started offering ear piercing services. That's a huge deal because ear piercing has always been Claire's signature thing. Claire's started doing ear piercings back in 1978, and they claim to have pierced over 100 million ears since then. For generations of people, getting your ears pierced at Claire's was a core memory. It was a rite of passage. Parents would bring their daughters to Claire's for their first ear piercing, and it created this emotional connection to the brand that kept customers coming back. Ear piercing was supposed to be untouchable. It's one of the few services that can't be replaced by online shopping. You have to physically go somewhere to get it done. But now, Five Below is doing it too, and they have more locations than Claire's. So even that advantage is disappearing. Which brings us to maybe the most devastating problem of all. Younger generations just don't care about Claire's anymore. The brand has always relied on attracting new generations of young customers. That's how they survived for decades. But something shifted. Kids today see Claire's as outdated, old-fashioned, lame. Their parents might have nostalgia for the brand, maybe even their grandparents, but the current generation isn't forming that same emotional bond. There are just too many newer, cooler options available. Claire's is competing with brands that feel more modern and relevant, and they're losing. Without that generational connection, there's no reason for Claire's to exist. The whole business model depended on young girls begging their parents to take them to Claire's, and that's just not happening anymore. So in 2018, after years of struggling, Claire's filed for bankruptcy. They were able to reduce their debt by $1.9 billion, close some underperforming stores, and brought in a new CEO named Ryan Vero, who tried implementing turnaround strategies. Some of his efforts seemed promising at times, but ultimately none of it was enough. After 5 years, they replaced him with Chris Kramer, who had been serving as the company's CFO and COO. And in August 2025, under Kramer's leadership, Claire's filed for bankruptcy again. The second time in 7 years, they reached out to over 150 potential buyers trying to find someone willing to take over the company. Most of them said no. They warned that if no one stepped up, they'd be forced to close hundreds of stores, possibly all of them. Finally, a holding company called Ames Watson agreed to a deal. They offered $140 million to acquire between 800 and 950 Claire's locations. Let that number sink in for a second. In 2007, Apollo Management paid $3.1 billion for Claire's. 18 years later, the company sold for $140 million. That's less than 5% of what it was worth at its peak. And even with this deal, things are still unstable. Most stores will probably stay open for now, but nobody knows what the long-term future looks like. The brand that once dominated American malls is now just hanging on by a thread. Claire's is a perfect example of what happens when private equity destroys a profitable company. They took a business with zero debt and record profits, loaded it with billions in debt, and then watched it slowly collapse under the weight. Every dollar that could have been used to modernize and compete went to interest payments instead. And when economic disasters hit, Claire's had no cushion to survive. It's a playbook that's been used to kill dozens of brands, and Claire's is just the latest victim. The real question now is, how many other mall brands are next? If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.